Hey guys, welcome to the Paranormal Council, where we are going to be talking about psychology and how it relates to paranormal, a lot of different aspects. And this is going to be part one of a two-part series. We are down a member tonight, kind of a last minute thing, or else we would have probably found another replacement member tonight. So we apologize. But joining me to talk about this amazing subject. So if you're into this, and what I mean by that is, guys, we cover a lot of the paranormal. So like, subscribe, share. You're not going to want to miss this. Trust me. We're going to get into the psychology of things, meaning that like confirmation bias and all types of things. So you are not going to want to miss it. I'm telling you. All right, joining me is of course Stacy Talich, Jen Daniels, and of course myself, Josh Morris. And you don't see me because I am on the road. Don't worry, I'm using driver assist, and I'm not really paying attention to anything but the road and talking. So, guys, welcome. And so let's dive into the psychology of paranormal. So, first thing I want to kind of get into, guys, is let's talk about the basics. I want to talk about
It's having signal problems.
of course.
You must be going through the holler.
Am I breaking up?
Yeah, hard.
Am I breaking up?
You're breaking up hard.
All right. Well, you guys are always welcome to jump in if you need to. But guys, psychology of the paranormal. I'm going to lay it out to you guys. Talk a little bit about the basics of what it means to kind of go into a situation, whether it's investigating, whether it's helping people out in the paranormal, whether it's research. What's the mentality? What's the psychology going into something? Where should you be at?
Well,
go ahead,
Jen.
Stacey. Okay. Right. We'll just jump in.
When you go into a haunted location that you know is haunted or you suspect to be haunted, that's what you're actually doing is front loading your brain for certain expectations based off of your life history, movies that you've seen, personal experiences that you've had at other spooky locations. All of that suddenly comes to the forefront in your mind in what you are expecting, because your brain, the thinking part of your brain is always trying to anticipate what is going on in the world around you. It's what keeps you alive, so you don't get eaten by lions, during Neanderthal days. You're trying to anticipate danger, trying to anticipate previous experiences in order to maneuver what to do in order to essentially survive. Now, usually you're not in a real life or death situation, but when that adrenaline starts to flow, that's the first thing that starts to happen. You go through various stages of let's say panic. The military has color coded these things to various stages of fear. The most intense during combat is called black. That's when your vision, your peripheral vision turns into tunnel vision, and you can only see what's directly in front of you. You can hear your heart. You can actually feel your heartbeat in your own teeth, and you are in absolute terror, trying to, maneuver the situation in order to survive the situation. And a lot of times, your physical senses start to telescope. They gross motion, and you can't find motor function. Like, you can't write something while you're in that state of panic. Your arms, your elbows, your shoulders, these are the things that actually will move, but the finer things will not. Your overall sensory becomes heightened as well. Your hearing becomes heightened, your sense of touch becomes heightened, and you really start to see things that may or may not be there because your eyes are trying to anticipate something that is a threat. And you're going to a haunted location for an investigation. Depending on your experience, you don't get that so much because you know that you're safe. You're just looking for, whatever out of the norm could be taking place, which could signal some spirit activity. But if you're inexperienced and you're, doing it for the first time, or you're doing it after a traumatic event, your body just triggers these things. And you start doing what's known as matrixing. You'll start to see things that aren't really there, but are in the shape of things that you already know. You will see faces in wood grain, in the woodwork, because you're anticipating a spirit to actually be there. Your brain will give you what you're asking for, which is to see things, and it's not real. It's a hallucination or an illusion, but it's your brain that's actually triggering these things based off of your previous life experience.
Right. I want to jump in there real quick too, because I know Jen's going to get into some good stuff. Real quick, I just want to say that this is kind of a reason why, if you're watching this and you're into paranormal investigating, this is why you experience people.
We're not getting any of that yet.
We can talk more about.
He reminds me of the audio version of a stormtrooper right about now.
Yeah, well, no, it sounds like Hal when he was being shut down, in 2001.
Sorry, Josh. Your signal is not so great.
You driving through the holler? Oh,
Yep.
Is he gone?
He might. I don't know if he can hear us. Well, we'll keep going. How about that? He can jump in when he gets back. No, I think you brought up a lot of really good points, and I've seen it a lot. I've had a lot of discussion with other investigators, and I've seen it with both new and old investigators. And I'll give some specific examples. First, I better say hi. We've got a viewer, Melissa Ball. That's my mom. Hi, Mom.
Oh.
There he went. And anyway, so a lot of things that I've seen and talked to other investigators about is exactly what you're talking about, right? And they call it pareidolia, where the mind creates things that aren't there. And I'll give some examples that we encounter while investigating and reviewing evidence that I've recently come across in the last, 6 to 8 months. But you were talking about matrixing and how you're seeing things that aren't there. And a perfect example of that is I had another investigator send me a picture of a door, and they had this area circled on the door, and all they saw was they said it was a full body apparition. And I asked them, hey, can you send me before pictures? Can you send me after pictures? I'd like to see what we're looking at here. And because when they go to you and say, hey, look, there's a full bodied apparition, and then you see this area, you're like, oh yeah, maybe. But then when you look at the other pictures, and specifically one in the light, you can clearly see that there is an area of the wood that's been aged or affected differently, and it hasn't changed. He's back. It hasn't changed in the second picture, where they've now circled it and called it a full-bodied apparition. I've also seen a picture of the trees, where the trees were a certain way, just the way the foliage sat. And they were like, look, it's they called it a Bigfoot. And I was like, that, Bigfoot you typically think of as hairy, not this tree giant. And it was like, wait, how do you have a picture of Bigfoot? How does that work? Or in another term that's not related to pictures, right? This is a common technique that investigators use that I personally struggle with, because it is exactly confirmation bias, where we're using our senses, but we're kind of putting our perception into it first and expecting the responses that we want to hear or we are asking to hear rather than what's there. And I bring it up because I've seen it in, again, new and veteran investigators, which was surprising. But a lot of times you'll be doing like a spirit box session, right? And you'll be asking for somebody's name, and a name will come across. Well, if earlier in the night an investigator said, "Hey, is there a Steve attached to this property?" It doesn't matter what name the box says, they will automatically hear Steve. And it doesn't matter if 4 other people heard Scott, Sean, something else, they only hear Steve. And a lot of times they're not asking for it to repeat for clarity. They're just automatically jumping in going, "Oh, yep, that's what it was." And then moving forward with a line of questioning that then confirms what they suspected about a known person historically or whatever they perceived this message to be. And I really struggle with that because if we're looking at the science, right, there's no way that follows a scientific method whatsoever. It's completely biased. It's not factual gathering of data, and it's creating an illusion. And on the spiritual side of that, when I have witnessed this in person, it's really, really frustrating to the spirits that are there, that are trying to communicate. It's almost like, let's say you've had your wisdom teeth out and, you can't feel your jaw real well, and you're trying to talk and you're asking your mom for, a Sprite because it hurts, and you can't get the word out and she thinks she wants sausage. It's frustrating. It's very frustrating for them. So
I also bring that up. I bring that up too, like what you're saying, Jen. I also will use where I'll talk about how, like, if they were to investigate Graceland or something, any spirit that comes across are automatically going to say it's Elvis.
Right. And people, a lot of times I've seen it happen where I bring up that Steve incident specifically because I saw them ask, "Hey, is this Steve?" And then a word came across that started with an S and didn't even sound like a name to me or anybody else in the room. And they instantly thought it was Steve. And I thought it was interesting because in that particular instance, I was like, well, is he getting information? Is he doing some kind of a reading to get this name? Well, as we were pulling out, the driveway next door had a mailbox and the last name was on the side of it, and it was Stephen. And I was like, that's interesting. So probably what happened was they unknowingly noticed it on the way in, didn't give it any second thought whatsoever. And it just stuck in their brain, and they assumed that that was a thing and somehow made a false connection. And it kind of took over the entire investigation and therefore messed up the evidence that we were gathering and put it in a completely different context that was essentially unusable.
But I think sorry.
Well, I was going to say that's front loading. You got confirmation bias, which is a state of mind, but the act of taking in information that is crucial that you don't necessarily know that you're taking in that turns around and is infected with the confirmation bias. Like the Steve, that was a front load, and the confirmation bias, completed the circle. Mentalists will use that as a trick in order to, on stage, to get people to essentially look like the guy is psychic on stage, but he's actually feeding them bits of information randomly when he speaks, sometimes blatantly, and they're so zoned out by all the glitter and all the ooh-ah that's going on around him, they don't actually hear it, but they hear it. And then he turns around and uses that with the audience as a participant, and they end up repeating what he was saying, and it sounds like he was he was being psychic in the process. And it's crazy. It's a really good trick, but it's the subtle front load is how they're able to do that. And it's part hypnotism, part, stagehand. But it really comes down to your brain has two aspects to it. Not right and left, yes, those are hemispheres, but they have the thinking portion, the conscious portion, and the unconscious portion. And in the middle, there's a thing called the limen. It's the gatekeeper between the two, so they don't bleed into each other all the time. The limen is where we get the word subliminal. The subliminal side is where your subconscious is at, or your unconscious is at. And that's the massive database that just gobbles up information. Even information that you're not actually needing or using at the moment, it still takes it all in. And it will basically spoon feed information back into your conscious mind, depending on whether or not there's a need. Because the conscious mind is actually pretty stupid. It's not a very big powerhouses in your brain. It only has roughly 64K worth of processing power. Now, 64K is like, an old Commodore computer. It's not really that powerful as far as like processing is concerned. A lot of the things that you do normally through your day, you're not actually seeing as it's shown to you. It's kind of like your browser. You have to refresh on your browser in order to see the world new as it really is. Have you ever like lost your keys and looked all over for them? You can't find them. You're just looking and looking and looking all over the place. You can't find your keys, and then you turn around after cussing and swearing, and just find them right there in the middle of the kitchen table. They were sitting there the whole time. You didn't see them the whole time, even though they were sitting right there. Well, you didn't overlook them. Your brain was feeding you cached information about your room, about your house, so it doesn't have to work so hard. It feeds you back information that you already know, so it doesn't have to process new information. And when you request new information because you're frustrated and all of that, it will actually feed you real new information. You'll see things that you normally didn't see, like your car keys or stuff on the floor, the sock that was lying there the whole time and you just never saw it, and all of a sudden it's glaring at you. Things like that. Your conscious mind is really not that smart. Your unconscious mind is where all of the information in that massive database actually rests.
Yeah, if my mind was a damn computer, it would be like one of those Radio Shack TRS 80s or something. It wouldn't even be like a Commodore 64.
It's really not that far off. Your brain only has 23 watts of power. That's a dim bulb. You can't even light a good light bulb with that. But that's the whole processing power of your brain.
Yeah, I'm not lighting nothing with my brain.
But it's easy to trick yourself in an investigation of what it is that you're seeing and what you're doing. That's why the equipment is crucial if you want to find evidence, because unless you are really trained in the psychology of eyewitness flaws, what you're looking for in the flaw of the eyewitness testimony, you're going to be fooled every time. But the hard evidence, the EVP or the camera or whatever, that filters and gets a lot of it out of the way.
Yeah.
So one thing I would like, Jen, if you could, because I know you do you led a team for a while, and I guess what would be the advice to people to try to minimize confirmation bias going into a situation?
Oh, that's a long list. A lot of it is, I know, so there's a lot of people who more and more teams now are opting to not do the historical research until afterwards. And that is always, I think, helpful, very helpful, because that way you can use that information in to confirm what you've already captured in evidence, so to speak. But it also doesn't share things like names and time periods and events that go on there. So anything that you get information wise through, like, say, a spirit box session, it gives it more credibility when you can, back it up after the fact. Anybody who is, quote unquote, gifted in any way, one of the biggest things that I run into all the time is, oh, we're not going to talk about it on the way there. Well, by the time I get there, I have half of the freaking history. I know the timeline. I know all of your past experiences there. I know all this stuff. So it doesn't really matter if I sit there and listen to the host at the location give me a full history, or if I'm walking around reading things that are in their museum. It doesn't really matter because you've already given it to me on the way there. So now I'm already front loaded going into it, which makes our job so much harder, right?
Mhm.
Because now anything that we receive as information, really, so our own consciousness messes with it, in the fact that, we'll get information and then we'll be like, is that what I heard? Oh, wait, did I hear this instead? Why did I get told that? Like, what am I supposed to do with this information? We're already trying to process that. But then when you go in front loaded, now you have to sort through all of this other stuff to try to get the message that they're trying to get across that's very clear oftentimes. So, like, and that's one of the things I talk about when I talk about mentorship with people, is always go with your first. Whatever that instantaneous thought is, that is what the message is, because that is the truth of it before you mess with it with your own thought process. Your own perspective kicks in. Your surrounding kicks in. If there's a cold spot or a draft or whatever, it automatically pulls away from the information that you're getting. But the front loading starts in an investigate, like in a team, as soon as you start talking about a location. Like when you book the location, great, it costs this much, this is the day, these are the times. And as far as that goes, that, anybody who has abilities needs to be as far away from it as possible. They don't need to be involved in, hey, I think we should put a camera here because so-and-so said they caught some activity here, or, hey, I think we should run this experiment and that experiment and use this tool and that tool. And, all of that creates that front-loading bias in somebody with abilities. It's so much better if they just literally walk in blind. But teams, I don't think.
I agree with some of that. Am I cutting in and out?
Yeah.
A little bit.
Awesome. Love it.
Jen, you're right on the first thing that you sent.
You're just gonna hear me fucking yell at traffic soon.
We said no road rage.
The whole process of remote viewing is resetting that initial 3 seconds of pure information that's coming to you, because that first 3 seconds is real data. It's real information, and resetting that over and over and over and over again and writing it down as you go is what remote viewing, that's the whole process. Now, the stuff that the military created is structured in such a way to where you can actually put it all together at the end like a jigsaw puzzle based off of that over and over and over and over again information bits along the way. But that's remote viewing in a nutshell. What you do and what you understand to be real information to be used in sensing stuff, because it comes in massive bursts and a lot of information. It's not just like a little bit of information. It's a lot of information, like drinking out of a fire hose. Being able to unwind that is the trick, is the skill. And anybody who's been trained in remote viewing, that's really what you're doing. You're unwinding that burst of data over a period of 25 minutes to 45 minutes in targeted information. And you don't know what it is that it's blind. You don't know what you're targeting. You won't know until after you're done what the actual question was or what the target was. So it's almost like the old Johnny Carson show, the great Zinsky or whatever it was. He had a envelope on his head, and he would say the answer, and the question was in the envelope. And it was a bit that he used to do. It's a lot like that. You're blind to what the actual question is, and you give the answer of whatever that targeting is. And if you do it right in a haunting, you're going into a haunted location. That's exactly how you should treat it. You don't know anything. You don't have any information, and you're just gonna download all the information and then confirm it after the fact. That's where the ooh and ah comes from. Ooh, ah,
Yeah, well, see, and to kind of, be more specific, and my answer to Josh's question is what would my advice be is, clearly define roles on the team. Having one person who is in charge of that, who gets some of that information so that they can know where in the house they might want to set up, equipment, what types of equipment they might want to use there. But that person be a trusted person who's not going to share that information.
Yeah.
Right. And you can't, and you can't, and you can't lead it. Like you can be a leader, but you can't lead, like have leading questions, as they say in court, right? You can't lead it. If you know the history and you know things, then you pretty much have to just stay quiet, just be generic, and ask generic questions. What's your name? Are you male? Are you female? Generic, but don't try to bias your team, or if you're that person that knows and nobody else does.
Yeah. And if you're the psychic, you quarantine the psychic.
Yeah, but even the team leader, I think what he's talking about is like when they're doing a spirit box session, don't kind of, if we're not getting any responses, don't ask a question that is kind of loaded to try to get a response because you have more information, because then that takes it down a completely different path to try to create an experience or to create evidence, and that can throw an investigation way off track. I think that's where he was going with that. Because I mean, in all reality, these haunted locations that we go to, especially the busy ones, right? There's different types. In the most common ones, the popular locations that people go to, a lot of times the spirits are like, seriously, get away from me. I'm done with you. Or they're like, here we go again. It's bait time. What are we going to do? And so you're going to get totally different reactions that aren't necessarily informative or like giving us the history or filling in the blanks. They're just messing with you or done with you. And then you've got other locations that have had, a few people go there and, they've maybe a varied experience and they're like, I don't know if I want to share. I don't know if I want to do this. But at the same time, they're like, I don't know how to, right? That's usually those locations, you're going to find a lot more of the touching. Like Josh always talks about how, when you get touched by a spirit, it's not necessarily because they're trying to hurt you. They're just trying to interact with you and they don't understand how to utilize their new being or form to be able to do that, right? And then you have other places that have never seen an investigator before, or maybe only once or twice, or a new spirit passing through the area that's never encountered one. And they're just confused. And so it takes a minute to help them understand the process and help them understand how to interact. And the thing is that no matter which one of those types of locations, you're going to run into spirits that want to participate. And they're going to share different types of information. They're in a different form now, but they're still like they see similarities, right? And some of them even want to get back to their human form. And So there's plenty of information to be had, but I feel like sometimes there's like this rush to get answers. Like we need some activity now. There isn't a lot of patience in the investigative anymore, if that makes sense. You know, especially if it's a known location with a lot of activity. It's like you show up and you expect to have activity within the first 30 minutes. You know.
Well, not only that, I mean, I was gonna say, think about it. Like we went from investigations in the old days where it was always stuff you had to go back and listen to, like recordings and things like that. And nowadays, with all these devices and TV shows with editing, all these ghost hunters expect instant results. I mean, the spirit box, all these things are designed to try to have instant results. It's not like the days where you just record and then go back and review evidence, and then that's when you hear stuff.
Right.
Well, there's also a context problem too. You know, human nature thinks, lets you believe that you're the center of the universe and everything that's happening is happening to you. Not the case, especially with spirits. When you hear things on EVPs or in spirit box or whatever, not everything is in context in relation to you. I've seen or heard EVPs that, you know, they're asking questions and doing things, and then what comes across is get out or fuck you or I hate you, you know, things like that. They're not talking to the people in the room necessarily. They could be talking to other spirits that have entered the sphere, and they don't like those spirits and they're trying to get them to leave, but they're coming across the microphone and the recording in the argument amongst themselves. But people seem to think that, oh, it's demonic. It's a demonic spirit. It's telling me to get out and get it to fuck off. Ah. No, that's not it. You just relax.
You're absolutely right. But I think, Stacey, you can probably relate to this one as well. And a lot of, maybe people don't know this on teams. Maybe it's just not common knowledge. But I've actually done like my own test my theories on some of that with spirit boxes. And so when you have abilities and you can communicate effectively a lot of times with them, I've actually been able to have an investigator run a spirit box where I say nothing verbally, nothing out loud. And they'll ask questions and get no response. I'll ask a question and something will come across and they'll assume it was an answer to their question. And then I'll go ahead and ask another question and they'll get another response and they'll make it fit in the box of the question they asked before that one. But all of these answers are direct answers to the question I've asked in my head.
Yeah.
And I have been able to run entire spirit box sessions confirming everything alongside an investigator who had a completely different spirit box session. And it didn't quite fit, but they made it fit. If that makes sense.
I've never done the spirit box thing. I want to use a dead bell, because the dead bell, I think, would be more pure for yes and no, you know, answers on that front.
Epic box.
You know, I'm
the epic box.
I'm kind of split on the epic box, because it does have so much additional noise to it. You get the matrixing going on. But the dead bell is a little bit more pure in my personal experience. It would be, because I've actually used real bells and the basic little.
I'm just saying the epic box is a yes no.
Well, at any rate, yeah, that's exactly what you're talking about. Things that I've been communicating with, been getting direct answers or confirmations, more or less, not answers to my questions, but confirmations of the answers that I've been given. It's basically a second opinion that comes across that way. You know, and it's a useful tool in that regard, because you're subject to the human condition. You can't get around that. And the human condition is you're fallible. You can make mistakes. Your imagination gets away from you. different things like that. You can't get away with it as hard as you try. And the more you start convincing yourself of your own bullshit, the more wrong that you're going to get. So you have to be your own worst enemy when it comes to skepticism. And the only way around that is get a second opinion. And that's where that comes about.
Right. No, exactly. Well, and I was thinking about other times when I've seen kind of, I don't want to call it necessarily interference, because this is all testing theories, right? This is all testing interactions and what works and what doesn't work. But from like a team leader perspective, and Josh has talked about it many times, we've all talked about it, about, how important it is to make sure that when you go on an investigation, you have this good energy, so that you're bringing positivity and openness to encourage communication. So, right, you want to be right in your head when you go in there, and right spiritually.
Yeah,
And
certain somebody that might be watching. There's somebody I know that went to an investigation recently that didn't have their head quite where it needs to be, but I'm not going to name names.
Mm-hmm.
They're probably watching. They might. Anyways.
I think the road rage is getting the best of him.
I'm not having road rage, I swear. I'm having internet rage.
There was, as a team leader, it's so important that we watch our team members. And, honestly, in my opinion, a team leader, whoever's in the team lead for that investigation needs to not be investigating. They need to not be participating. They need to be securing information, making sure, the technical is where it's supposed to be, making sure that they've got enough access or to the historical stuff to be able to then confirm later. They need to be watching their team members spiritually, mentally, physically. They need to be ensuring safety. They need to be doing all kinds of things that have nothing to do with investigating. In order to have a good, healthy, safe investigation, team leaders shouldn't even be participating, in my opinion. And I say that having done it. But I've seen where I've been watching team members sit around, and there's like 4 or 5 of them sitting there on couches or whatever, and they're doing a spirit box session, which seems to be the favorite of a lot of teams. And you'll see that the one who came in that night that wasn't feeling very well, they had a really long day, they're tired, they're just not feeling good. You can see their whole body language change as they're sitting there. And you can see their facial expression change. And you start to feel this energy off of them like, hey, I'm not doing okay, I'm being really negative. And then, you can only imagine the thoughts going through their head. And shortly after that, or as it's happening, the spirit box will say, sick. Mm-hmm. And then immediately, whoever's doing the spirit box or the whole room goes, were you sick? Did you die from illness? And it's like, they're sick. They're not doing well. They're trying to alert us to watch out for our team member. Uh-huh. And what did you just say in your head? Because, if you're saying, I don't feel well, I don't know what's wrong with me, and they're saying you're sick, you might need to go see a doctor or get a flu test. Yeah. So many times it has absolutely nothing to do with what we perceive it to if we're not paying attention to our surroundings and the people in the room.
Or what's
and the
in their own
energy
head.
that they bring.
People don't pay attention to what's going on in their own head. It's like a hamster wheel that just goes and goes and goes and goes, and they don't pay attention to it because it just is. They'll be thinking something, they'll be saying something, and then all of a sudden the dead will respond to it because they can hear everything that's going on inside your skull. So it's
I want to jump in real quick. Before we get too far past, I want to push back halfway on what Jen said earlier about leaders. I think Jen's half right. As far as leaders, if you have like a 4 or 5 man team, I think that it would be ideal for a leader to know what's going on, but sit back, watch his investigators do what they do, and then and run the technical, the maybe filming, whatever. I agree with that part. When it's smaller than 4 man, it's kind of harder for a leader to do that again because so. But as a leader, if you're in that situation where you only have a few people, you really got to do your best to just be open-minded and don't. I mean, there's always going to be some confirmation bias to a point, obviously, but you really want to do your best to minimize. Just be open-minded and don't let your pre-existing knowledge guide you down maybe the wrong questioning, or even in this case, even like Jen's saying, even if you hear the word sick or whatever, those type of things. But anyways, I just wanted to throw that in there before we got too far past the leadership role.
No, I get that. And I agree with you. It's really hard to run all the different facets of a smaller team without participating. You almost have to. Or, if you're splitting, you have 4 and you split into 2, you have to. You have to participate to a certain level. But I think there's ways to, like you said, minimize it and distribute roles and responsibilities very specifically and clearly, and it's important to have team members that you can trust in the roles and responsibilities that you give them to have the best investigation. And if we're trying to talk about psychology, but we really are, right? We're talking about how our thoughts, our energies, our processes affect the actual experiments that we're doing and investigating, and we're talking about what we bring to it, and then evaluating after the fact. These are all psychological processes that we're discussing. And, a lot of it is, we're not naming, the different theories or methods. We're not talking about the Bader-Meinhof method or anything like that. We're specifically related to confirmation bias, but we are, kind of addressing all of it at the same time, so to speak. And
I want to throw in one more thing too for folks, since we're talking about psychology. Is this is a little off? It relates, and that is, guys, do not drink alcohol or smoke weed, or do not be impaired when you go to these places, because that also will affect psychology and your spiritual state, all that stuff. It can leave you vulnerable. And anyway, I had to throw that in there.
Yeah, it'd be smarter to drive drunk. It's so many things can happen to you in a haunted location that you may not even be aware of at the time or even directly afterwards. That you can get an attachment from these places because, well, you're drunk and, well, that's pretty tasty to a malevolent spirit. They're going to want more of that. And then the next thing you know, you're an alcoholic living under a bridge because your life turns to shit. And all because you decided they would be, tee-hee-hee to go get drunk and go to a haunted location. Just don't do it.
Another thing
and then
realize too,
especially
prescription medications are also, there's I've seen a lot of investigators with an entire pharmacy, and they're out there going to some of the darkest known places and staying the longest in it. They'll drink on top of it. It's a very dangerous situation, and a lot of the people that I have to help are people who have done those things. So just
don't be one of those. Can you guys hear me? But don't be one of those people that's gonna have a small sip, or I'm just gonna have a little bit, like a 1 or 2 beers. I won't tell anybody. I'll show up. Don't be that person, because you're putting the team at risk.
Yeah. See, and when I was running Rooted Journey, I had some very strict rules about that. And I caught so much crap from that because I'm an adult. I can do what I want. But I mean, I had rules that if we had an investigation and we all went out for dinner beforehand at 6:00 at night, investigation started at 8, but we were all meeting at 6, they had to be done drinking 12 hours beforehand. If they consumed anything in those 12 hours, they were automatically declined from attending. And that included the pregame dinner, right? And they were like, that's so unreasonable. You know, that's ridiculous. I'm like, if you can't quit drinking by 6 a.m. to be there at 6 p.m., we might have another issue going on, right?
Yeah.
Especially when you consider how at risk you put other people. And I even told them, like, when they do podcasts and things like that, if you are not done 4 hours in advance, don't even think about it. And like you were saying, drunk driving, you know, my thing is too, is sometimes we have a 2, 3, 4 hour drive to a location. If we're meeting at 6, you're leaving at, you know, noon or 2, depending. You don't need to be on the road. You're still drunk if you stop drinking at 6 a.m. You know, you're still in the sobering up process. Let's just not do that.
Yeah.
You know?
Now, we talked a lot about some of the different aspects of like ghost hunting. And of course, next week, we're going to get into some even more detailed probably stuff regarding even just more spiritual things. But as we start to get close to the end of the show today, I want you guys to, I want all of us, if as long as I, you know, have signal, to give advice to people on what your advice is to sort of mentally prepare for going to places like that, or in general, maybe even going to Walmart.
As far as mentally prepare, I'm of the opinion that you void out any expectations. You know, destroy any expectations that you have of what you're going to see, feel, or experience. You're going to a location to find something, not to invent something or create something. It is something that happens to you, not something that you are involved with in that regard. Destroy any expectations you have. If you go in thinking anything about the location, you're already putting yourself at a disadvantage.
Yeah, I agree with that. I also agree that, you know, or I also believe that a lot of times people think, oh, I'm mentally prepared, but they don't consider the spiritual side.
Mm-hmm.
They say, oh, well, I had a good day. I'm in a good mood. I'm ready to go. But they don't think about things like medications they're taking, or they don't think about things like, I'm drawing a blank right at the moment, but you know, they haven't done any of their grounding. They haven't done any of their meditation that they used to do. They haven't done any, they haven't engaged in their spiritual practices in any way. Or, yeah, they might be feeling good right now, but yesterday they lost a family member. Or, you know, they are like, well, maybe I'm getting sick. I'm not physically feeling so well. All of those things, there's like an emotional side, there's a physical side, there's a mental side, there's, you know, a spiritual side. And a lot of times we'll just focus on one of those areas and be like, oh, we're good to go. Never mind that the rest is completely falling apart, right? I'm running 102 fever, but I paid, I'm going, you know.
Well, women should also pay attention to where they're at on that particular time of the month.
I was going to bring that up. Yep. Because I'm like, I'm the token girl in the room. Let me bring that up so Stacy doesn't sound like an ass. Yep. Let me do that.
That might also affect other investigators too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
you know, well, it's not just that time of the month. I mean, there's all things like, you know, perimenopause and menopause, and, you know, there's just hormonal cycles from aging and different things like that. And it's men and women, but primarily women. You know, chocolate does not solve everything. I'm sorry.
yeah.
You know, you're right about that. You're exactly right about that, because it absolutely affects your mental state and your physical state.
Spirits, when they actually start to communicate with you, they will try and trigger physical emotions, because emotions are easier to communicate in data sets than actual words or ideas. So emotions on being able to feel, extreme love, fear, hate, sadness, these things are usually the first stages of communications with spirits. And if you're new to it and you're having a hormonal imbalance, and then all of a sudden you're just walking down the hallway and then start crying, like, people are going to be like, okay, is that spirit communication, or are you just that time of the month? Because you don't really know where you're at in your cycle. It could be either. You got an estrogen dump that just happened in the middle of an investigation, and you don't know whether it's you or whether it's the spirits talking. Because I've seen, seances where women will just start crying in the middle of the seance for no reason whatsoever. They don't know why they're crying. They're just crying. And, sometimes it's spirit communication. Sometimes it's, needing a Midol.
Well,
here's an important thing too. I'm sorry. I was just going to say, men, you're not off the hook. Okay. For those of you that are middle-aged, a midlife crisis does not always mean that you're going to just go and divorce your wife and get a blonde and a Corvette. Okay. Midlife crises come in different forms, and men can be emotional and things like that. I wanted to point that out because often, it's easy for us to jump to women and periods like menopause and of course those things. But men, you're not off the hook. You can be emotional. You can have your situation in your life, like as in midlife crisis type stuff, that things that you may not even realize, especially if you start crying during commercials and you didn't know why.
Yeah, low T is what they call it. You got more estrogen flowing in your system than you do testosterone, and that happens with age. You can't get away from it unless you're, eating raw steak at least once a week. It's just part of it. Men need testosterone, and they start producing less of it as they age, and that means the estrogen imbalance starts to take hold.
Yeah, but the physical and the emotional toll that takes, like, it's not to say, hey, if you got your period, don't go ghost hunting. It's not saying that at all. It's just saying, you have to be self-reflective. You have to be self-aware.
Mm-hmm.
You have to understand where you're at. You have to understand, for somebody that's in that situation, it might be time to step out and take a breather a little more often so that you're not overwhelming your system, because you're already experiencing this rush, this emotional overload, or this physical overload, hormonal overload. It's just better self-care. And that's what when people ask me, I'm like, self-care is important, spiritual self-care and therapeutic self-care. If you're running around with all of your childhood trauma, all of your middle-aged trauma all piled up on each other, you've never tried to let it out, you've never found a way to get it out, you're a ticking time bomb. So any spirit box that says fuck you, you're going to blow, and it's not going to be good, and so you have to be prepared in all ways for an investigation to give it the best that we can.
Know thyself.
And I also wanted to say too earlier, when you were talking about sort of that mental prep or spiritual, is like, yeah, you can be in a great mood, but that doesn't necessarily equate. Just like with what Jen said and what Stacy both said, when Jen was talking about being in a mood but spiritual, and then Stacy talking about the way spirits communicate with you. A lot of it's through energy with the emotions and stuff. And if you can be in a great mood, like there's days I'm in a great mood, but guess what? My energies are spastic and energetic and all over the place. So I have to like calm myself down and center myself, which I have done through training. Now I can do it a lot faster than I used to, but I actually did quite a bit of yoga back in the day. Believe it or not, it's a great way to, especially when you get to the end and you do ohms. It's a great way to center yourself and reach some more calmness, so that's also a little tip for some of you all. But any last minute things that you guys want to add?
Just
we
know
kinda talked-
thyself.
Yeah.
You know, if you're going to do it, you're going to need to know thyself physically, mentally, and emotionally. You need to know yourself, because that's data or corruption of data in an investigation. It can work both ways. It's real information or crappy information. And that's, you know, it all has to be accounted for in the inventory of your data set. So know thyself.
Yep. Yep. And I mean, our brains do not understand the difference between a reality and imagination, right? So
No.
our responses to it are based off of what we're getting, and that will mess up data sets so fast and the information that we're getting. And, you know, you're right. I mean, you have to know yourself. You have to know your boundaries. You have to know your limits. You have to know everything about you, and you have to do self-care.
Mhm.
And I think, you know, most people don't realize the amount of work and effort that goes into successful investigations that have really good evidence, and how much maintenance full-time investigators need to do. And that's why you see so many kind of crash and burn out. They're not taking care of themselves. They're about the next high at the next location, you know, or the popularity that comes with getting a lot of good evidence, things like that. And so, you know yourself and take care of yourself. That's the most important things you can do as an investigator before you even begin.
Well, guys, I think that's all great advice. And I got to say, I hope for those of you that stuck it out and watched this, I hope you got a lot of good information, because I always learn, and I've been doing this for many, many, many years, but I still learn. I learned from Stacy, Jen, Chanel, everybody on the panel, and my other peers. It's, you know, no matter how long you've been doing this, always learn, always be open minded, and get in tune with yourself. Just like they said, get in tune with yourself, and more importantly, get in tune with the show, and like and subscribe, share, guys. We do this every Thursday. We try to every Thursday. Usually there's 4 of us. Hopefully there'll be 4 of us next week as we continue in and we dive even deeper and get Chanel's take, hopefully, on psychology and paranormal. So, guys, thank you all, and we will see you next week.
Peace.